Hey everybody, Josh from SILCA here, and today we are talking about winter riding, and I was going to open this video with like, winter riders, beware! Maybe it's not quite that gruesome, but you know, the more we look at it, when you really dive in on the muck that you are riding through in the winter, especially here in the Midwest, it's bad. It's real bad. So we've worked with our partners, with the firm that we use to develop our cleaning products. Again, they're automotive and auto racing specialists, to really understand like what is in the salt and the grit and the crap they put on the road, and what is it doing to your bicycle, your components, and particularly your drivetrain and bearings, right? I think we have the maximum opportunity for for corrosion and the worst possible outcome. So let's dive in. So there are essentially four major ice melt technologies currently used in the United States, and not everywhere uses ice melt. There are still places that put sand down. I know in like southern Indiana they put down cinder, which is a super abrasive, nasty stuff. It doesn't melt the ice or the snow. Sand and cinder, they just try to add traction. That stuff is super abrasive and aggressive and terrible. So both for your car and your bike, if you are experiencing that, you know, God help you, because you're just creating a sandpaper out of pretty much every moving surface on the bicycle. My big advice there would be just wash that bike really well after every ride to try to get the sand and the cinder out. So let's put that aside, and then let's look at the four types of ice melt. So you've got your classic sodium chloride, right? Essentially table salt. It's a really good ice melter. It's super cheap and abundant. The problem with it is that it is mega corrosive, right? Salt water, like you know, from the ocean, super corrosive, and it only works down to so cold. Okay, so you know, we see this, I would say, maybe in use more in the South, and certainly in places where, you know, I know there are years here in Indiana where they run out of like the more expensive stuff and they move to the cheaper stuff. But you know, warmer, icier days, sodium chloride is pretty common, and that is notable mostly in that it's white. So when you look down, you see the salt on the ground that's white. That's likely to be the sodium chloride. Super corrosive. You know, working a little bit better than that, you've got calcium chloride, which is also white to more of a kind of a clear. That is slightly less corrosive, works in lower temperatures, and has the unique kind of interesting part. It's hygroscopic, so it wants to pull water to the top, and it wants to hold on to water a little bit better than, say, a sodium chloride does. That can be great in some instances, and certainly for actually melting the ice, but it does then allow the water to remain around longer, and I would say operates at slightly higher concentrations in the water that's on the ground. So when you're flinging it up onto the bicycle, there's higher concentrations of the ice melt in there, and then eventually, if you just put the bike up after your ride and that water evaporates, you can have higher concentrations of the calcium chloride left behind than maybe you would have had with the sodium chloride. So magnesium chloride, right? So this is similar to calcium chloride in its effect. It's not quite as hygroscopic, super aggressive on metal parts. So again, this is another one we have to be really careful about when we talk about, you know, aluminums with thin anodized, or, you know, steel coatings. You know, a lot of the chains out there we've talked about, you know, the very high-end ones might get really good hard chrome plating, but the mid-range stuff, you're not getting nearly as corrosion resistant of a plating, and this is one of the chemicals that attacks that and can cause a lot of surface rusting, or if it gets down into bearings that are non-stainless steel, essentially can wreck a bearing within days. And then last, we have potassium chloride. It is less common. It's a little bit more expensive. I would say you probably don't see this one nearly as much, but it's slightly less corrosive than the others. But if left in place and with repeated exposure, it's still somewhat corrosive. So any of you out there who are into old cars, you know, you all know, you know, you find a car from the 60s, 70s, right? You want that thing to have grown up and lived in Arizona. Because if it's somewhere, anywhere where it's seen salt even a little bit, you're going to have problems long term. And same thing goes for bicycles. I know none of us are out there typically trying to keep our bicycles around for 30, 40 years, unless you're into the vintage stuff like I am. But the same effects are all in play. And I think the cycling media has done us a little bit of a disservice for years, certainly at least when I was growing up, there was this idea that aluminum doesn't corrode, right? Like the advantage of aluminum over steel is that it doesn't rust. Well, it doesn't rust, but it still corrodes. And some of these chemicals can really aggressively eat at, damage, pit aluminum, can leach out certain of the alloying elements that are in the aluminum, particularly if there's copper or silicon, and can wreak really just as much havoc on an aluminum part as maybe a steel part if you get into the wrong mix of chemicals. So what do we do about this, right? It's terrible out there. We still want to ride. And so we're going to give you some tips and tricks for kind of what to look for, how to think about it, and then from a product perspective, what you should and shouldn't be using. All right, so we've established that really all four of the common de-icing agents are both some level of corrosive, and also they are all some level of abrasive. And so I think, anybody who's throwing salt in their driveway or on a sidewalk, you get what I'm saying, or even just take table salt and feel that, right? If table salt all these salts are crystalline, and they are rather hard crystals. So you can break them down into smaller and smaller crystals, but they still remain abrasive. So, you might start out with the equivalent of a 100 grit sandpaper, but as it breaks down, it's just becoming a finer and finer sandpaper. So you really need to get it out of there. Well, what are the tips and tricks for getting it out? All of these are more soluble in warmer water than they are in cooler water. And so I think that's an important thing to really think about when you do go to do the cleaning. If you can get the bike inside somewhere and allow the bike to warm up a little bit, if you can use warm water, you're going to have a much quicker and easier time of getting this shit kind of dissolved into the water and running out than if the bike is cold and the water is cold. So one of the things that I've always recommended is, get one of those kind of pump top bug sprayers. You can fill it inside from the hot tap, bring it somewhere out where you're going to wash the bicycle and actually get it hosed off with warm water. It's low pressure, so you're not having to worry about driving it into bearings or anything. But start out with a warm water wash or flush if possible. I know a lot of our kind of city dwellers living in apartments, we see a lot of bike washing in showers. That's fabulous. It really works well, and it's a great way to get hot water on the bicycle. Ben Delaney did a great, he bought a piece of hose, one of those like flexible soft-sided hoses, and has a bathroom sink. I think he talked about in one of his videos that he can actually screw the hose up under the bathroom sink that's nearest his garage and basically run a hot water tap out into the garage. Starting the wash with a hot water rinse is going to be really important because, again, you think all these things are also abrasive. And so if you go to using soapy water or brushing or rubbing, even just the pedaling through of the bicycle with that abrasive salt inside and on these surfaces, you are creating scratches. This is a common thing in automotive. People talk about swirl marks. That's a common, you don't fully get the car rinsed, or maybe you're not rinsing with warm water, and then you're just going straight to sort of a mechanical washing process on that surface. You're micro scratching that surface with all of these crystals that are stuck on there. So we want to hit warm water first if possible. And again, pump sprayer, if you can use your bathroom tap, your shower, whatever, there are methods for this. Best of luck. And it's a little bit of a pain in the ass, but it will be well worth your time going forward, because again, these things can be 2, 3, 4, 5 times more soluble in warm water than they are cold, and it's kind of a nonlinear effect. So if your bike is in sub-freezing, if you can just get the bike in and get it to the warmth of the house, 70 Fahrenheit or whatever you keep the house at, and then even use lukewarm water, you are going to be significantly more effective than if you're using cold on cold. So for starters, and that one be a little bit of a headache, but that's like the one free thing you can do that really, really helps out. Let's talk about what we're doing with our drivetrains in the wet. We talk a lot about waxing, but we also talk a lot about, when do you go to oil-based? The thing to remember with the oil-based drivetrain is that it hides the fact that it's breaking down. It hides the fact that it's full of abrasives. So if you're using oil-based lubricants on your chain, or even like a traditional dry lubricant that's only filling up 20 to 20% of the open space in the chain, all of that salt water and just the salt crystals that get thrown up on there are getting pulled into the inside where they will continue to be abrasive. So if you are using a wet lubricant in these conditions and you can see the salt on the road, you're riding through it, you really need to be fully degreasing that chain and re-lubing it with the wet lube every single ride. Otherwise, you are just pulling this abrasive grit into the chain where it's just going to continue to grind away on things. And because these wet lubes are so good at hiding the fact that they're full of abrasives, you're never hearing it, right? You're not hearing that it's grinding away, and so you're doing damage and you think you're fine. Your other alternative here is wax lube. Again, hot wax better than drip wax in these instances. And the wax, as we've talked about, it lets you know when it's breaking down, but as it's moving towards its breakdown period, it is just orders of magnitude better at keeping that abrasive shit out of the inside of the chain. So if you are waxing, hot waxing your chain, after every ride, you should really just do your warm water rinse, wash, maybe top off with a drip wax like Super Secret. You're probably going to get, 8, 10, 12 rides between hot waxings like this because it's just so much better at keeping that abrasive stuff out. And then when you hear the chain starting to get a little tippy-tappy, a little noisy, that's your sign from the lubricant that it's beginning to fail and it needs to be topped off. So, a lot of people say, hey, wax doesn't work in the rain, it doesn't work in the cold. Well, it actually still works much better in the rain and much better in the cold. It does let you know when it's failing, whereas the other stuff really hides that it's failing. So, what I recommend there is, down to freezing, maybe the high 20s, something like a Super Secret is really the sweet spot. We've talked about in previous videos, when it gets much colder than that, you can add a little synergetic oil-based lubricant to your wax, which will make it a little bit softer at room temperature, which makes it about equivalent hardness when it's super cold. And so, half a bottle of synergetic and 400 or 500 grams of hot wax really makes an amazing cold and super cold weather wax that'll, you can add a little more synergetic if you live in Alaska and you're riding it, minus 20 Celsius versus, just riding it, -5 or -2 or whatever. Here in Indiana, we've had a lot of, -7 to -10 sort of weather lately. And, I'm honestly trying not to get out and ride in it, but have still done a little bit of that and find, somewhere in that quarter to third bottle, maybe half bottle of synergetic into your wax really makes for a nice sweet spot. The synergetic also does contain some anti-corrosive additives that do help add some anti-corrosive properties to the wax. The wax at baseline already has an anti-corrosive agent and an anti-static agent, but of course the anti-static agent is good at keeping dry dust off. It's not helping you when it's wet sodium and magnesium chloride, water being splashed onto the chain. So those would be our big recommendations there. Hot water rinse, wax drivetrain is better than your oil-based drivetrain. If you are oil-based, you really need to be cleaning that thing every single ride. And then the last one there to think about is, how often you're doing sort of a full wash and a protective coat. Your frame might not need a full soapy wash every ride, but you probably want to be doing that every 3, 4, 5 rides in these conditions. You can use a waterless wash product. We make this one, ceramic waterless wash. It works amazingly well. you want to do this over a bike that has been pre-rinsed with warm water. So everything has to be pre-wet to use these waterless wash products. And then you're spraying it either on the mitt or onto the bicycle, careful to avoid the brake rotors and the brake pads, and then you can do your wipe. The real benefit of a product like this is it leaves behind a hard silicon dioxide wax coating that is super resistant to all of these de-icing chemicals. So, there's a number of these products in the market. I think ours is excellent because it's ours and we've developed it, but I would certainly think about something like this if you can't do a full water wash. If you can, do a full water wash, with a wash mitt or a sponge or a brush, soapy bucket, hot water, brush it. That's really going to give you the best clean. And then if you want to do a product like this over top as a protectant, or something like our graphene, this is a good graphene sealer as a protectant, these can be used on metal components and even plastic parts, as well as on the rest of the bicycle. So you're actually able to form kind of a hard seal coating over top of the components as well as the paint, which again just buys you precious time in keeping these de-icing chemicals from really, etching away your anodize or scratching your paint or leading to swirl marks, or really any of those problems. The last thing we want to cover here is after a winter of doing this, you really need to invest in either a full overhaul of the bicycle, and particularly its bearings that you do yourself or that you do with a bike shop. And the bearings and the bearing retaining surfaces are the couple of areas where you can have the most damage, that's the most expensive. In most cases, or in a lot of cases, it's not repairable at all. So you're just looking at full replacements of components. And the thing that happens there is you've got a bearing that's press fit into, say, aluminum or carbon. And, it's a press fit, but you still have micro, pathways around the circumference of that bearing. And same thing on the shaft, right? You maybe have a steel or an aluminum shaft. It's not 100% sealed there. And so if these de-icing or ice melt chemicals get in there with water and dry, you can really lead to accelerated corrosion of aluminum as well as the bearing race material. And once this starts to go, it can actually damage whatever it's pressed into. So if that's a hub shell or a frame, and so you really want to look at your headset, your bottom bracket, and your wheel bearings at the end of the season before you come into the summer, because you don't want any of these nasty ice melt chemicals that have crept in there. You don't want those hanging around. And all the stuff we're talking about here can really clean it out of everything else, can really protect the rest of the drivetrain, but none of these have the power to kind of infiltrate where those products have already crept that they shouldn't be, and draw them out, right? There's no good drawing them out without taking things apart. So, through the shitty, gross, mucky, disgusting season, clean as best you can. Again, hot water, if nothing else, just get some hot water on it. That is going to put you miles above where you would have been. And then coming into, call it March, when the weather starts to turn, get those bearings looked at and overhauled. Get that bar tape replaced, because that's another one, especially with aluminum bars. All this stuff creeps under the bar tape where it just over time corrodes and will cause you terrible headache down the road if it's not addressed coming into the season. So there you go. Drop your questions, comments, thoughts below. We'd love to hear them, and we'll see you next time.